For my beloved Chinese friend to go on Twitter and say, hey, the president of China is the candidate that I vote for. My participation actually counts in this society. We think that Chinese people and the society itself is in a stage where they're already ready to accept democratic values, the true values that we're going to uphold in today's debate, that these people are already rational enough, informed enough, but also they have a general consent in the society. We're not going to talk about how we're going to make those, like the Communist Party of China resign their posts, or like how ask the politicians around resign their posts and split up into two parties. We're not going to talk about those kind of practical benefits. We're just going to talk about when people are ready, are the people in China ready for this democracy, Mr. Speaker? Because we think that the basic values of democracy is always based upon the value by the people, of the people, for the people, right? We're going to exclude the kind of like practicality issues of like, is this person ready to, give up? No, we're not going to talk about that, right? So I'm going to have to, I'm just going to have one argument divided into three parts. Why China is basically ready, right? Number one, we think that when it comes to like education and information, that's the key factor of a participation of a citizen. The reason why China wasn't ready like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is basically because of, to some extent, in the status quo it happens again, but still the sense of censorship, the sense of information that they got was only one-sided towards in favor of the Communist Party, saying that our communist value is the way to go. Other democratic states and other nations are basically bullying us. They're the bad way to go. We think that this has changed in the status quo. Why? When it comes to primary and secondary education in China, yes, still the way of learning non-democratic values exists. But when it comes to advanced education, such as grad school, such as university, there's a lot of foreign and Western influx in China. We see a lot of Western professors. We see students coming abroad from other countries. So thank you. We see a lot of textbooks and class book materials being based on Western books. No longer China is the sole responsible factor, or the responsible publisher of this information, but there's now a check and balance of information saying that, look, we're a communist state, but universities and those higher education is also teaching these people about what democracy is. I think that when one person is actually willing to make those kind of participations, informing that person is the most important thing. Basically knowing what I'm voting for, knowing what I'm doing and what I'm changing it now. We think that Chinese people now, my Chinese friends, are already ready enough. We see a lot of Chinese debaters now saying democracy is good, we should uphold democracy, right? This kind of a social movement itself, from the very grassroots, from the very 20s and 30s, are happening in the status quo. There's a saying in China like "Ba Ling Ho," basically meaning people who are born after the 80s are the people who are the most westernized people who are the most liberal people that are willing to accept the kind of values that Western countries also give to them. We think that when we see a massive demand or requirement for their participation to make my kind of opinions or voice count in the society, but the government has no option to provide so. We think that when that kind of principle is based on the people's willingness to participate, based upon the rational decisions that are casted from the information that they get in the status quo, that's why China is ready for allowing participation. Yes.
Are you saying that those majority of people in China are accepting those Western values you are saying?
Yes, because when you see it compared to the past, where only education took place in Beijing, like Shanghai and these kind of big cities, we see education also taking place in the rural rural areas, right? Not only the urban areas like the big cities have big universities, but also China has a policy of mandating and actually encouraging and subsidizing universities to happen in the very rural regions where education didn't happen in the very first place. So when we're dealing with a 1.4 billion population being massively oppressed by the government, saying in the past oppressed by the government, don't believe in these values, and when we compare that to the status quo where the government is actively willing to make universities that educate them, inform them to make a good choice, we think that this is a clear sign of China being ready for a full-blown democracy, right? Number two, we think that the government's representation of Chinese government attempt to representing the citizens is also taking place in the status quo. Basically, whenever a Chinese government believed in this is the way to go, believing in the communist value is the way to go in the past. We think that in the status quo, they have a lot of ways for making people have their voices, reflecting the citizens' voice in the status quo. What do we see? Basically, we see in the past provinces and districts in China, their officials have to go around and see how the city or like the provinces or districts is run. What we see in the now status quo is basically a multilateral conversation happening between the citizens and the government. Why? We see a lot of government-run, like official, like government-run blogs, as when citizens can actually actively post their opinions towards the situation and get a check and balance towards the government. Also, we see a situation where government is actually broadcasting these kind of platforms to hear citizens' voices. That's why recently we saw the Jiangsu province leader actually having a broadcast system, like discussion and debate with the people in his own province of having, how is my district, how is my leadership working for you? How did your life change? Those kind of basic check and balances that the Chinese government is willing to make, we think that that's the core factor of government actively being ready to represent their citizens in the way they want to do. Why? In the status quo, we don't have that kind of check and balance mechanism. When the Chinese government screws up in this way, citizens, even if they wanted to say, like, this way is a wrong way to go, they didn't have that in the past. Now, we're telling you that these kind of platforms are already existing and being actively provided by the government. So when they go into the wrong direction, they have the citizens to say, I really don't want you to go in that direction, maybe consider a different way. We think that the sense of a check and balance also exists in the status quo. That's where they're ready, right? But moreover, the last level analysis, like whole sense of China, like being a proud comrade of the Communist Party, like me having a lot of nationalism, believing China is the center of the world. We think that these values were the values that prohibited China from being democratized. Why? Because they believe that basically their way, as I explained, their way is the way to go. Their government is ruling them in the most efficient and effective way because they understand the mentality of Chinese people. We think that the sense of nationalism, or to some extent their stubbornness, is decreasing. Why? When we see people casting doubts on their choices, when Chinese people see on news that United States did this had a lot of monetary and fiscal policies towards the world financial crisis that happened in 2007 and 2008, Chinese people actually casted doubt towards the government, saying, why didn't our government act in that way? Why didn't our government actually act in a more flexible way in order to deal with the situation just like any other democratic countries did? Why? Because the existence of a conservative party, a liberal party, and multiple political beliefs combining and fighting each other itself provides a check and balance system. The Chinese people casting doubt is the very reason why these kind of check and balance mechanism is ready to take place, Mr. Speaker. I love China, I love Chinese people, but when it comes to when they be open to politics, I think they're pretty much well opened. This is the reason why I can even more love China, right? I want that kind of society to take place now.
Okay. You want to? Go ahead, you can start. I'll do this one, you do the next one, okay? I mean, after that, we do all of them. So that was 7 minutes and 26 seconds from the Prime Minister.
Thank you for the speech. I'd like to call the first speaker from the opposition.
I'm very honored to be in this finalist debate. I thank everyone for coming. Okay, so when it comes to talking about a political system changing, it means a lot to the individuals. We are changing the society structure in general, which eventually affects a lot of people, which believes that country have to face a huge change regarding their region and also to other things. And in this debate, yes, we are not talking about whether democracy is good or bad, but we're discussing whether they are ready or not. Is it really actually China ready for this change? We believe it's not. And our stance is that China is not really ready, and they need to fulfill some qualification before they actually take multi-party elections. So before I go into any of my substantive arguments, I'll provide several rebuttals. First of all, Min Young come up here and said how people are educated. and how like people go to the universities and they accept the value of the democracy. However, Mr. Speaker, is this really? First of all, these are the minorities who actually get university education in the first place. Majority of the Chinese people do not receive university education because of some economical situation that they're facing. And secondly, the reason why it is very important of the child education is because children are like sponges. They observe things very clearly, and that's the very important role of the fundamental and secondary education. And they clearly told you that in the status quo, how these children are being taught that communism is the ideology that makes what's perfect. And if these education are taught it to in the stage of the child, we believe that that itself is very detrimental. And which really restrained them from even thinking of multi-party elections in the first place. And second, they talked about how multilateral communication is working well in the status quo, like how government is actually willing to have a communication with their citizens. However, Mr. Speaker, it's not true. In the case of China, many words are actually being censored, even to many topics of the discussion itself is being censored. So we believe that the range of the communication itself is very limited and that is a very limited communication. So that we don't believe that this represents how like Chinese people are open to like democratic values. And thirdly, they talked about how like many citizens tend to doubt. Like firstly, lack of evidence. They have to come here and provide a specific like statistics or like how to ensure like how people are actually doubting. And secondly, like when the citizens are actually doubting their governments, why then the government have to change the political system when they can just like simply set a policy or trying to like reinforce the policy? And that's the thing that they didn't really clarify. So as a responsible opposition, there are three things that I want to say first. Firstly, like how people do not really have willingness, and second, how there will, even if there will multi-party elections happening, how it really won't have check and balances. And thirdly, when so opposition side will also say when the China is ready and what are the criteria that should be fulfilled before they say that they are ready. So firstly, I'll talk about the willingness. It's separated into two parts. First of all, about the citizens. So we see that in the status quo, China is developing rapidly, and there are increasing number of GDPs, and it's one of the most powerful nations in the world. And this clearly says that China itself is a very wealthy country. And citizens, when they look at the GDPs and all the statistics that the world provides, they believe that their country is well enough. The communism political idea is working actually fine. So does the citizen actually willing to face these changes when they see a society that is working very well without these changes? And secondly, to the government. Like, do government actually willing to face the changes? Because the government itself is ruled by a single party, which is a communism. And these parties are the actually ones who have the power. And are they willing to actually drop off their authorities and drop off their privilege all of a sudden for sake of the changing of for the multi-party elections? Because of the two stakeholders does not really clearly show the willingness to change the things, we do not see that the China is ready. And secondly, about how even if the multi-party elections happen now, how it doesn't really form a check and balances within it. The beauty of democracy, the beauty of multi-party elections is that there are diverse parties existing. And the reason why there is a diverse party is because there are many diverse people who believe in different ideologies. However, in the status quo in China, the primary and secondary education is focused on only single ideology, which is communism. And they have been taught that and believe throughout their years that communism is the perfect ideology and is the ideology only existing. And in this case, do you think that even though multi-party elections are allowed, won't they even really have the intention to create a different party in the first place? We believe it's not. Because of the education that they provide a limited information about the ideology itself, they won't really have a different ideology even though multi-party elections are allowed. And yes, sir.
party itself is not created by the education. It's created by the interest of the people. People have different interests.
Exactly. The interest of the people happens when they believe in certain ideologies that they think that's right and that best represents them. In the formation of the education, in the process of education, they believe that communism, like ruling a single party, best represents their interest, which is the exact ideology that supports them. So even though this happens, will they really be a check and balance existing with these different political systems? Like, check and balance exists when the different parties are in there according to the different ideology that individuals believe there. So we believe that since these are lacking, even though there are multi-party elections happening, there won't be check and balances. So Mr. Speaker, or like Madam Speaker, what have I told you today? I told you about how people do not really have the willingness in the first place. And then can the government say that it's ready for open multi-party election? And secondly, I told you, like, because of the lack of education or like the limited scope of education, the check and balance will not happen even though this motion passes. And as a first speaker, I think I clearly told you today, and we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
6 minutes, 48 seconds.
Thank you for the speech. Now do I call the second speaker from the stage.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, today in my speech, I prove to you what I really learned and improved in ADI. So today, from our stance is clear. From the government side, China is ready. They are ready to have a multi-party elections in the status quo. So I will prove to you why China is ready, and then what we have practical benefits in the status quo. So before I move on to my arguments, I will rebut to their cases and then move on. Firstly, they talked about because those educated people are very minorities in China, that will not going to happen, Mr. Speaker. But that is not true. Because firstly, people in China, majority people in China is actually getting education. Now they are in university and they have majority people are getting in university and then they have high quality of education. And as Prime Minister clearly proved to you, there is the education and influx of the information from the westernized education that proves to you how those education is not because of those minority, it will not going to change, but because of that education exists in the status quo in China, that China is ready for right now to have the multi-party elections, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, they talked about because of censorship in the status quo, so because of those censorship exists in the status quo, it will not going to happen because they are not ready. But that is not true again, because we know that censorship itself exists and we concede that censorship is there. But the people recognize it, and then they know that information or the wrong information, that censored information exists in that area, and then and people in China is now rational enough to find out how that information is censored and how that censored information cannot be accepted from the people in China and the status quo. Please sit down. And then I will move on to from the leader of opposition arguments. They talked about there is no willingness, right? Because of like citizens. China is developed rapidly, like because they develop rapidly, they're like wealthy China, so communism is okay. But ladies and gentlemen, they didn't really prove to us where is the link between now they really developed in the status quo, and then how that link to that people are satisfying in the communism itself, right? Because because what they're developing right now is not telling you that people are censored, that people are wealthy enough to they satisfy for the communism. But the thing is, they are not. So so they now people have even though there is some kind of censorship and that communism exists, they need the multi-party elections to have their representation and participation and accountability in the democratic society needs in the status quo. And third, and second argument from the leader of opposition was about the ideology issue, because there are only one ideology and education limited. It is not possible, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker. But it is not true, because ideology that party creates that ideology is not because of that education, but someone who people really believe, right? That party exists because of people who really elect. People who elect. That ideology itself doesn't make all changes or all make them to decide something. There is other issues than ideology. There is like social status or level of wealth. There are other issues that they should be considered. But they just saying that only the ideology issue, because of that limited ideology, that China is not ready right now. So, Mr. Speaker, please sit down. I will move on to our substantial argument, which is firstly, there is like accessible, practical benefits by having that multi-party election, Mr. Speaker. What is single party? Single party doesn't have any check and balance and any elections in the status quo. So because of that, people cannot have any kind of information. But by having that kind of multi-party election, for example, like we have, for example, in Korea or United States, we have Democratic or Republican parties itself, and then people, the characteristic of that multi-party system is we get accessible to that information, right? Because Democratic parties, they trying to promote their party's right, party's belief or party's belief, and then that Republicans giving their information of their own belief and self. So by having that multi-party elections in the status quo, they can have like accessible to that information, so people can elect those people can elect the candidates they really want by having that accessible and influx of information in the status quo. For example, like if you have no money, if you are suffering from poverty, of course, if the candidates really trying to promote yourself, like they trying to give you the opportunity, and then they want the poverty. They say poverty is good, and then they're trying to help them. Of course, because of that welfare system and then what that can represent themselves, because they were going to elect that candidates and then because they can simply because of that information that makes people to represent themselves by having that candidates. So how that is possible because of that multi-party elections, and then having the accessible information will make that concept of democracy can be possible, Mr. Speaker. As I proved to you that there is from the assumption from the opposition side that people in China is not educated, and then people in China is only having like ideology itself. But they should first prove to us why the developing countries, why just developing right now can be linked to that. They just communism is okay, Mr. Speaker. And then I prove to you by having an accessible information can help those people to have right candidates to choose by having the multi-party election. For those reasons, I'm proud to propose.
7 minutes, 20 seconds.
Okay, thank you for the speech. Now I'd like to call the second speaker from the
As a Taiwanese people, I really want Chinese become a election, to reduce the threat to my homeland. But however, today we're not talking about whether China need that or not. We're talking about whether they are already ready for this or not. So for my beloved homeland, I'm not sure. I think that we should. There is something something better for them to take the multi-party election later, but not right now. So what have government brought up today is that they're trying to defend that Chinese do have need and they do have willingness to do so. And by proving you people by taking the courses or having the education in university, it's actually letting people knowing the information. However, Mr. Speaker, there is a very truth is that China is still blocking people from the information. They're still blocking people when you're searching some certain words on Baidu, or they couldn't even let Google inside China. There is no Facebook. There is nothing that when you type some certain phrases like 法轮功, you will be blocked up at the very first place. I don't see how the people will touching this censor information when the country is blocked from the very first place. So the second speaker trying to defending that this censor information the people will still touch all this censor information, but we don't see how is that really going to happen at the end of the day. So before we moving on in my arguments, I'm going to prove you when is actually China really are ready to do so. When is China is really ready for the multi-party election. So before moving on to the arguments, let's see few rebuttals to the government side. We're not, as an opposition, we're not saying that China want it forever in the rest of the time, but we think that today is not the time right now is not the right time for China to adopt this kind of political system. And firstly, they comes up and saying that there's people they do want to have incentive to change in the societies. However, Mr. Speaker, if you see the status quo in China now, there's still a majority of the population are not well educated. There is a very huge gap between the people and people. It's because there is a gap between the rich and the poor. There is a gap between each region have different resources. That's why they have lack of education at the very first place. So that's what we're talking about. Even if they're trying to defend it that the majority are going to the university, but we didn't see that happen in the status quo. Second rebuttal, they were talking about how people is actually having how people is actually can get the information from the censorship. China is very good at building wall, so they also build a wall on the internet, not that people getting something outside, and also not get that information getting inside to the country. So when we're talking about it's not everybody going to university to having connection with those foreign professors, majority of people still cannot receive the full information itself. So we don't see that how the censorship or the things they're trying to prove is stand at the end of their speech. And third rebuttal regarding to the first speakers trying to talk about there will be a check and balance system in China. We have already proved you the education system and the curriculum itself is only let the citizens adopt one ideology, which is communism. So when is actually formed by this ideology, you cannot say that we cannot see there is a check and balance from other kind of ideas. It's checking what the government is doing. So based on these things, we don't think the check and balance itself is really happen in those societies. Yes?
When we know for a fact that university over 65% of the 20s and 30s are already in university education, when we know for a fact that the most proxies or VPN servers are consumed by Chinese, this proves that they have access towards those information.
So you're talking about the 20 to 30s of this population, right? But are they still the majorities in the society? So we don't really see like this 20 or to 30 years old people are still the majority. No, thank you, Chedong. And then moving on to the last rebuttal I'm going to do. The second speaker trying to defend that the people will like do the decision or like make their ideas like issue by issues. But where is the issues come from? This issue is also come from the ideology itself. So when there is an ideology form the issue, then we don't see that why there will be a multi-ideas of one issue. So in the end of the day, everything is about only one ideology still happening in the Chinese in the Chinese societies. So moving on to our arguments. I will explain like when the China is actually very like adoptful and when is the time for them to change their political systems. When we want to adopt a political system in the societies, we want it to work. So if there is not going to work, why we're so like urgent to letting China change just today after this debate? So we don't see that there's any like form for government trying to prove that why the China is actually changing. And we think that if it's not gonna work, then why is so urgent we're going to change right now? So actually, why it's not gonna, we have already proved why it's not really gonna work because majority of people still only have one ideology. The brainwashing education system, which we have a teammate studying in China for 12 years, and all the things he learned in school is communism. Everything is communism. And like even the history itself is actually very narrowed down to only yeah, maybe cool to you. It's only like beneficial to the one ideas. So when this kind of education system is not going to change at the first place, we don't see we don't see China is actually ready for this. We think that China should very first place changing their education curriculum or like feeding their people some different ideas at the first place. That's why it's making people have the different ideology, making people have different ideas to able to communicate with others, to able to form a different party from the communism. So we think that when China will be ready, I think when Chinese people, majority, like the real majority Chinese people, are well knowing there is something else called democracy, there is something else beside the communism. When they are worrying there is something different political systems exist and maybe work for them in the society, that's a time when China to do so. And we don't think that nowadays is a time for China. So for the sake of my beloved Chinese friends, I don't think it's time for you. Maybe later. Thank you.
7 minutes, 6 seconds.
Thank you for the speech. I would like to call the third speaker to the government.
May I start? Report? May I start? When the flower blossoms, right? We don't decide times. I think democracy is like a flower. If the people arises, if the people see the needs, if it is the human instinct, I think there is no time decided by whom. I think it's the people who, if the people are ready or instinctively react to the decisions made by the government, I think that's the time when the democracy comes into the reality.
I have three questions in this debate. First of all, are the Chinese people educated enough? I have no doubt, but they have actually. Secondly, are there communications between the government and the citizens enough? Third of all, are there any willingness? I have no doubt. Again, but yeah. First question: are they educated enough? They said it's so minorities, so that the people who are educated in China, right? But my prime minister actually said it's factually wrong. Like 70 or 80% of the people who got like more than secondary education in China. Actually, it is the Chinese government who is actually trying their best to build a university, like Kessel. I saw them. Kessel, and then invite all those foreign faculties to have the influx of the Western virtue and the Western education into their countries in the first place. I think it's the Chinese people who invite them in the first place, and it means they're ready to accept that education. Second of all, even if they're not educated, even if they're dumb, as they represent it, I think it's the small people who are changing the world. We see in the Gwangju, Korea, in the 1980s, who were the people who was rising against for the government? I think it was the university student in Gwangju who were rising against and saying, "You are fucked up." Oh, I'm not supposed to say this. You are mistaken. You are invisible. You are wrong. I think it's the small people change the people, even if they're not educated, even if they're dumb. What we were saying is it really matter? The time or education really matter? In this situation, Chinese people are already doing QQ. The Chinese people are already doing run. I see Chinese Google, Chinese Facebook, Chinese phone calls. I see all the communication tools working in the status quo. They're not using Google because they just hate that. They're not using Facebook because they just hate that. I think they have already communication tool to communicate and be educated in the status quo. And second of all, even if they're so dumb, I think there are multi-party system helping them. Why? Because the party itself, it has a signal or message to the people. If you're a liberal, if you're a Republican, I think itself has the characteristics of the party, saying to the people that I advocate these people. This party system is already helping these people to approach the Chinese people, saying that if you need this information, you gotta vote for us, right? I think this kind of party system can help this, even if they're dumb. Second of all, is the communication well enough established in this China? They said they all talking about the censorship of the biased information. So what they're characterizing is actually the focus bias. So if there are two candidates in Korean elections, say Moon Jae-in and Park Geun-hye, but if you actually view Park candidate only, so we don't know actually Moon candidate exists, right? This is kind of focus bias they are talking about. But there's another another bias called side base. So if the government is actually for one side and there are another media who is for the other side, people see the two sides of the coin. If the people see the two sides of the coin, just like we debate like proposition and opposition, we get the right information. So they haven't proved us why it's so focus bias, so that people can't actually think of the other option. But we in government side, we see QQ, other news systems, we see even CCTV broadcasting in the world. Oh, I thought it had impact, but it doesn't matter. But and then on the other hand, what we were trying to say is there were attempts from the government officials to try to make that platforms. Like saying leader of the Jiangsu or in the broadcasting program saying that, do you have any complaints? And what do you think about my leadership? I think this system of getting the feedback from the people is already an attempt of the leaders. They saying I think we need a checks and balances because I don't want to simply dominating you. I think this is already the attempt proving that this system is slowly changing in the first place. And third of all, is the willingness of the China people there. It's the most important class in this debate, right? Saying the opposition side were saying the citizens are actually feeling okay with their own systems and no feel problems, right? But I don't really think so. I saw 50% of our students in Seoul-Bridge is Chinese, right? But I see people talking about communism. I think there are because of the information they accepted in the university education, because of the information they saw in the media, because of the foreigners they live in the China, Beijing, Shanghai, they get the feedbacks about the communism. I think they already know what is communism I think they already know what's the different the ideology in this world exists, and that's why citizens are not feeling okay, because they know there is a bright side in the communism, but they know there is a dark side in the communism too. And also, the Chinese citizens are the one who wants to avoid the dominating power of the Chinese government in the first place. We saw Chinese people who are actually developing the proxy server to avoid the firewall, the great firewall made by the Chinese government, right? I saw these attempts of the citizens who are actively avoiding these dominating powers of the authority of the powers in the first place. And the last arguments of them regarding the willingness is like there is only one and only ideology educated to the people in China, so that they only know one ideology in their heads. I think it's simply not true. First of all, they're not that dumb enough to be restricted by one and only idea, and that's it. And second of all, there is a difference between the interest and the education. So, per se, you are taught by the teacher saying that the criminals are so bad, so you should not commit a crime. But because of the circumstances, you can also commit a crime, right? A small crime, whether it's small or big. So, suppose you become a criminal. You think you were educated that criminals are bad. But if you were in the position of the criminal, your interest changes towards because of your positions. I think because of this clear difference between the interest and the education, they will not just simply think that like communism is the best one. And what we were saying is that people are trying to casting doubts. When the Xi Jinping, sorry for pronunciation, when the Xi Jinping come out and say, I'll save the economy of the China, people reacted because people demanded. Something people demand, something people cast doubt in the status quo is already proving that China is accepting the democracy. Thank you.
7 minutes, 29 seconds.
Thank you for the speech. Now I'd like to call the first speaker from the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say I'm the only one from the beta class. And I'm proud to say Jen and Take was the person who made me to stand here and kick their butts. Okay, so it was fun part and another fun part. Like, as Minyoung mentioned, I lived in China for 12 years and I adopted for mandatory Chinese public education for my elementary school and the middle school, and then I moved to international school. But what Minyoung just lived in China for like 4 years, and he lived in China, like he lived in Shanghai, which is the most like international exposure city. So I will explain what's really happening in China. Like first, what's going on in public elementary school and middle school. Like during my like education year, like in public and elementary and middle school, I learned a lot about history and literature, like about the Communist Party, and then literature about one mouse like wrote, like about the poetry, even in the literature. So I found like very classic point in my identity. So I asked my parents, oh, I don't want to go to like public school in China. They may be wearing some kind of red cross here, and they may be worship like Chinese Communist Party. So I don't like this. And then I moved to international school, which is the Canadian high school. And like, but there was some problem in this school. Like 90% of students were Chinese. Okay, and there was a class, and my teacher said something bad about Chinese Communist Party. And during the flag ceremony, what happened? Like there was students' movement in our school because there was a socialist teacher say something bad about China. So we believe that those students in my school, even though they are exposure to those international or westernized education, they still believe Chinese Communist Party is the best. And when there are when some people saying bad thing about Chinese Communist Party, they really don't agree with that. So as a responsible opposition whip speaker, I found three clashes in today's debate. First, the check and balance. Does check and balance exist in China? And second, do people really deserve it? And thirdly, I will elaborate this into one clash. Is this the right timing? Okay, move on. So the first clash, check and balance exists, or does check and balance exist in China? Like as I mentioned, like Min-young has mentioning about like there's some kind of media or QQ or some random one. I have the account, but what I received is that only the censorship information, and I also like asked some debaters from China. I asked, do you guys censor the motion when you have like a session in your debate? They said yes. Like we're seeing we are seeing the very hard censorship in China existing now. But Min-young just exaggerated I think he's like quite positive about it. But we believe that the reality is not true. There are very clear censorship existing in China, and what opposition has mentioned to you, like we clearly show you how this censorship works in China. So people do not agree with other ideas. So the purpose of the multiple parties is about the checking and balance, right? We are agreeing with that. But they are only educated by only one party in China, and they believe that's the best one. So we believe that there is no existing check and balance system in China, even though there could be some people believe have their own interests. But we believe that this is not enough to check the whole Chinese Communist Party, which is like have ruling power in this situation. And second class, moving do people really deserve it? It's what government has mentioned is that every people have interest about interest. Like the second speaker came out had a 7-minute lecture about what's the good for democracy, what can people deserve their interest. But we believe that we are agreeing with that, like in China, people have their own interests, but we believe that they believe the Chinese Communist Party can solve that problem. So they doubt about they believe the Chinese Communist Party can have their best way to save their citizens and have provide best interest for their citizens. And so what okay, before I move on.
So we're not doubting about the Communist parties existing in the status quo. Why are they not ready?
Yeah. Thank you for reminding that. They also mentioning about. Thank you. And they mentioned about small people changing the world, and there are small people are doubting. But we believe that when small people can change the world, when those small people's idea can express to the majority. Clearly, but we have the censorship, so there could be not like idea cannot spread to the majority at first level, and second level, then there should be those small people's idea must be winning the idea of the majority people, winning the consensus of the social consensus. We read that this doesn't exist in China at this moment. So wrapping up, so to the third question, is it a right timing or? So as I mentioned, there should be a government check and balance system and the willingness. As I mentioned, there is no existing. The check and balance system is not that big enough to check the Chinese Communist Party at this moment. And the willingness of people, as my leader of opposition and Diero clearly mentioned you, there is no willingness of government which has the power to change the political system in school. And the citizen itself, they don't have the willingness to change this system at this moment. So we believe that this is not a good time for China to adopt the new political system, which is multiple party system. So last word for those Chinese debaters, just come to more regularly on ADI and debate more about democracy. It's you can change the China, but it's not.
6 minutes, 59 seconds.
Thank you for the speech. I'm going to call the reply from the opposition.
can start without NC? Yeah. Oh, okay, good. the biggest benefit I get this time in ADI is actually learn how to do reply speeches, and now I'm going to use this against these guys who never live in China as long as my teammates. So when Chandong comes up and saying that the flower, we don't decide when the flower blossom, but we're not deciding when the flower blossom. We're just saying that the flower, maybe it's not the time for it to blossom. Did you see the sakura blossom in the July? We don't see that. So we think that today it's not the then you're global women. So that's not the problem, like whether they need it or not. We still want to discuss whether it's now the suitable time or not. There's two standards that we're going to see this debate. First is that who understands the situation of China right now more than others, than the other side. And second is that whether it's now or not for the time for China to change, whether it's suitable time or not. So regarding to the first, who understands the situations of China is not. Even if all of these guys, the time they spend it in China, plus doesn't even equal to my teammates. So I think that actually he is the one who's actually under the Chinese education. And we can see that is still happening right now in China. There's only one ideology, we have already proved you, for teaching to these people. So when is only one ideology has happened under the status quo, we don't see they will have that much efficiency for the multi-party works under only one ideology. And secondly, we talk about that the censorship itself is actually blocking people from the information. That's also proof that the one ideology is actually much more stronger than the other's ideas. I explained to you, you cannot even use Google, and when you type certain, or you try to search certain phrases on the internet, you cannot even see what that's happening. My friend's when he worked in China, he trying to use to check some Falun Gong stuff, but when he started to typing the words, the internet magically just broke down. There's no internet connections in China when you're typing the certain words on that. So this kind of censorship is actually blocking people from knowing that much information. So even if they are trying to say small people change the world, but when this small group of people's ideas is actually blocking to the majorities, we don't see how they're going to change the world. Secondly, whether it's now or not, we have already told you when the system is not going to work, we don't see that it's going to be efficiency for now for China to change. Regarding with the willingness of the citizens and regarding with the willingness of the government, we have proof that in these two levels, actually it's not nobody, but majority still not have that much willingness to change the system. It's actually linked. It's also linked to whether the system will work or not. And at the end of the day, government is the one who runs the system. So when the government have no incentive to do so, we don't think it's a time for government to change right now. And secondly, we have already told you that why it's not now. We think that the education actually supposed to be due right now, and that this kind of change happen in the after, because we believe that by teaching kids more, or teaching your students more ideas, more ideologies, more different opinions, is actually will help this system work more efficiency. But now under the status quo, China is still mostly one ideology countries with the communism. So we believe that under this, what they're supposed to do is firstly educate the citizens at the very first place. Then after that, when the time comes, the flower will blossom at the end of the day. So we believe that according to all this reason, I think opposition actually stands much more stronger ground than the government today. Thank you.
4 minutes, 1 second.
Thank you very much. The final speech of this ADI tournament and this ADI.
If this debate goes to opposition, I'm not going to come to the next ADI. Why? I never got a lecture from Logan, Jusung, or Cecile saying, telling a lot of stories can actually win you a debate. Saying, I had a Chinese experience in China. If that can win you a debate, I would have replaced JD with the Chinese friends that I have in the back, right? The reason why opposition has failed in today's debate is basically because of this. They just said the government isn't ready because of censorship. people are stupid because of censorship. Because these people are somehow unwilling to adopt to another reason is because censorship. If censorship is the problem, the question that we have to ask is this. When censorship also exists in South Korea, when censorship also exists in the United States, do we have ways to get that information in the very first place, right? Do we have ways to actually go around the internet system, whether or not it's on internet or it's not on the internet? Do people in China get the information necessarily? We had a lot of approaches saying that. We said, number one, in mainland, there's people who get higher quality education from Western professors, from Western textbooks. And then say, no, they're stupid, they don't have universities, they don't have money, blah, 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 blah. We told you through a fact that Chinese people already have the incentive provided from the government in order to make them educated, in order to make them have access to those Western informations about those influxes of the information. But secondly, we also talked about when foreigners are going into China, or as we see a lot of Chinese people in Korea, when Chinese people go out of their country, this kind of a free flow of like human resources itself is also providing information. Me telling to one of my Chinese friends that this is how democracy is, this is what communism is, telling them the difference itself is also a way of informing that person. Does censorship extend upon the point that my friend can't get information because of the great firewall that China has set up? We don't think that that's happening under status quo. And even if we talk about Wikipedia and talk about Google and talk about YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, whatnot, JD provided you a lot of examples that China has already substitutes for those kind of social networking services. By the fact that social networking services are already prevalent in China means that they want the kind of free flow of information, the exchange of ideas itself. That's the reason why China, yes, they don't have YouTube, they have Youku. They don't have Twitter and Facebook, they have Weibo, right? These are all those kind of substitutes that exist in China is a sign that people are ready to accept those kind of information that comes from those textbooks, Twitter, whatnot. We tell you that if access of information, if you also agree to the fact that, when the deputy said the only time that's ready is when China changes their own curriculum, they basically concede the fact that once you have information, you're ready for democracy. Our side of the house clearly proved to you why censorship and those kind of things can also be evaded, right? Proxy servers, VPN servers are massively consumed by the Chinese people. If you basically type VPN in Baidu, which is by the way a Chinese version of Google, you have like 3 billion sites saying that we can offer you free VPN, so you can actually go around the service and have those accesses, right? In any single cases where there's an intervention of information being restricted, there's always a way for the Chinese citizens to go around that censorship and get those information at the end of the day, right? And then this minor question about does the government have the incentive to change or whatnot? We clearly told you, obviously, if you go to a United States and, hey, are you willing to become a communist state? Going to Russia and say, are you willing to become a democratic state? I don't think any government will say, yeah, actually, welcome, why not? The reason why we're excluding government's willingness to actively become a democratic state is because no government will actually actively mold their own system. It's the people who mold the citizens, it's the people who mold the political system. It's the uprising of the people that actually can make a change, that make a difference in our society, right? It's basically not the Chinese government's willingness, it's our Chinese friends sitting on the back row willing to make a change in our society, their voices being counted in our society. We had a lot of examples why that's actually also being allowed in Chinese government and society in general, right? We talked about how a lot of communication between government entities and also individual citizens' households are taking place in the status quo. We talked about how the utilization of information actually leads those Chinese people to cast doubt on their country and saying that, what if we were a democratic country? What would we have done in that situation, right? Basically, that kind of casting doubt situation leads to the citizens being already, it's a proof that these citizens are already ready for democratization and having a multiple party, right? Basically, this is why government has won today's debate, and I hope any single Chinese people who see this video on YouTube, on Twitter, is because it's allowed under our policy.